This is from The Manufacture of Madness by Thomas Satz, published 1970. The final pages of the first chapter, commencing page 24. These judgments are rendered impossible in principle by two assumptions concerning the therapeutic relationship. The first is that the person facing the medical or theological expert is a helpless, inferior being to whom the physician or priest owes a responsibility independent of his, the expert's, knowledge and skill, and which he cannot shirk. The second is that the institutional psychiatrist or inquisitor derives no selfish gains from his work with the patient or heretic, and that were it not for his selfless devotion to healing or saving souls, he would be only too happy to leave the sufferer to his horrible fate. For these reasons, such messianic therapists feel that they must do something, even if what they do is harmful to the sufferer. The unfortunate outcome, until recent times, of most therapeutic interventions for the patient is therefore hardly surprising. In the first place, before the present century, the healing arts were in an exceedingly primitive state. Moreover, since the therapeutic interventions imposed on patients were prompted largely by the physician's or priest's own feelings of self-importance, obligations, guilt, and of course possible cravings for power and sadism, they were unrestrained by assessments of their curative value for the client or his informed consent to or refusal of the service. These circumstances still characterize the purveyance of public and sometimes even of private psychiatric care, whose quality thus remains similarly unchecked by the free decisions of the ostensible recipients of its services. It is consistent with this character of the wars on witchcraft and mental illness that vast efforts are made to refine the criteria of witchcraft and mental illness, but these labors only serve to confirm more securely the reality of these threats and the legitimacy of the defenses against them. Herein, as we have seen, lay the fatal weakness of Ware's opposition against the excesses of the witchcrafts, and herein, too, lies the fatal weakness of the moderate contemporary opposition against the excesses of the mental health movement. Like Ware before him, the moderate contemporary critic of involuntary mental hospitalization opposes only the abuses and excesses of institutional psychiatry. He wants to improve the system, not to abolish it. He too believes in mental illness and in the desirability of committing the insane. His main complaint against involuntary mental hospitalization is that patients are committed too often and too readily. For example, that patients with unrecognized bodily diseases, such as subdural hematoma, brain tumor, cancer of the pancreas, and so forth, are sometimes hastily categorized as psychotic and improperly confined in mental hospitals. This argument only serves to confirm the validity of institutional psychiatry's core concept of mental illness and the legitimacy of its paradigm intervention in voluntary mental hospitalization. The foregoing problems of differential diagnosis are bound to arise and will persist so long as physicians are entrusted with matters completely unrelated to medicine. A physician may or may not be able to ascertain that a patient suffers from bodily illness, but if he thinks the patient does not, he cannot infer from this that his symptoms are due to witchcraft or mental illness, if for no other reason that there is no such illness. These problems of differential diagnosis would disappear if we regarded the physician as an expert on diseases of the body only and recognized mental illness as a fictitious entity similar to witchcraft. Were we to do this, the physician's evaluative function would be limited making an organic diagnosis and concluding that he cannot make one, and his therapeutic function to treating bodily diseases or abstaining from treatment. The problem of who is a fit subject for commitment would likewise disappear if we regarded involuntary mental hospitalization as a crime against humanity. The question of who was a fit subject for burning at the stake was answered only when witch hunting was abandoned. I believe that the question of who is a fit subject for commitment will also be answered only when we abandon the practice of involuntary mental hospitalization. Although the witch hunts seem to us today an obvious crime, we must be cautious about passing judgment on the men who believed in witchcraft and fought against witches. Those magistrates who persecuted witches and demoniacs, who lit so many bonfires, asks the noted French historian of psychiatry René Samelignan, should they be accused of cruelty as they frequently are? And he answers, they too were people of their time, and thus had their prejudices, beliefs, and convictions. They thought in their souls and conscience that they were just when they struck the guilty in accordance with the law. The inquisitors who opposed and persecuted the heretics acted in accordance with their sincere beliefs, just as psychiatrists who oppose and persecute the insane act in accordance with theirs. In each instance, we may disagree with the beliefs and repudiate the methods, but we cannot condemn the inquisitors doubly, first for having certain beliefs and then for acting upon them. Neither can we condemn the institutional psychiatrists doubly, first for holding that social nonconformity is a mental illness, and then for incarcerating the mental patient in a hospital. Insofar as psychiatrists truly believes in the myth of mental illness, he is compelled by the inner logic of this construct to treat, with benevolent therapeutic intent, those who suffer from this malady, even though his patients cannot help but experience the treatment as a form of persecution. Although the Inquisition and institutional psychiatry developed from different economic, moral, and social conditions, their respective operations are similar. Each institution articulates its oppressive methods in therapeutic terms. The inquisitor saves the heretic's soul and the integrity of his church. The psychiatrist restores his patient to mental health and protects his society from the dangerously insane. Like the psychiatrist, the inquisitor is an epidemiologist. He is concerned with the prevalence of witchcraft. He is a diagnostician. He establishes who is a witch and who is not. And finally, he is a therapist. He exorcises the devil and thus ensures the salvation of the involuntary mental patient. He exorcises the devil and thus ensures the salvation of the possessed person's soul. On the other hand, the witch, like the involuntary mental patient, is cast into a degraded and deviant role against her will, is subjected to certain diagnostic procedures to establish whether or not she is a witch, and finally is deprived of liberty and often life, ostensibly for her own benefit. Finally, as we have noted earlier, once the roles of witch and mental patient become established, occasionally people will seek for reasons of their own to occupy these roles voluntarily. For example, Jules Michelet writes that, quote, "Not a few witches seemed positively to want to go to the stake, and the sooner the better." An English witch, on being led to the stake, tells the crowd not to blame her judges. "I wanted to die. My family shunned me. My husband repudiated me. If I lived, I should only be a disgrace to my friends. I longed for death, and I lied to gain my end." Unquote. Christina Hole offers the following interpretation of the motives that led men to incriminate themselves and others as witches. Quote, "To accuse an enemy of witchcraft was an easy method of revenge. To declare oneself bewitched was a shortcut to that flattering attention so much desired by unbalanced and hysterical individuals. Very often the accuser's main object was to draw attention to himself and to pose as the victim of some witch's peculiar malice." In 1599, Thomas Darling of Burton-on-Trent confessed that his story of 3 years before was quite untrue, his fits a fake. His reason for the deception was that one might be given by many other lying accusers. "I did it all," he said, "either of ignorance or to get myself glory thereby." Since a desire for flattering attention is not confined to unbalanced and hysterical individuals, but is on the contrary a basic human need, it is easy to see why, under certain circumstances, men will readily assume the role of a witch, criminal, or mental patient. In sum, what we call modern dynamic psychiatry is neither a glamorous advance over the superstitions and practices of the witch hunts, as contemporary psychiatric propagandists would have us believe, nor a retrogression from the humanism of Renaissance and the scientific spirit of the Enlightenment, as romantic traditionalists would have it. In actuality, institutional psychiatry is a continuation of the Inquisition. All that has really changed is the vocabulary and the social style. The vocabulary conforms to the intellectual expectations of our age. It is a pseudo-medical jargon that parodies the concepts of science. The social style conforms to the political expectations of our age. It is a pseudo-liberal social movement that parodies the ideals of freedom and rationality.